The Midwest Logistics Excellence Gala buzzed with the kind of artificial energy that only came from mixing corporate ambition with premium liquor. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 300 of the region's most influential business leaders, all dressed in their finest, all pretending they weren't sizing each other up like hunters at a watering hole. Leon Claiborne adjusted his tie for the dozenth time, his calloused hands betraying his discomfort with the silk noose around his neck. 41 years of hard work had earned him a seat at this table, but he still felt like an imposter among the sharks in Armani suits. His weathered face, marked by years supervising freight operations under harsh warehouse lights, stood in stark contrast to the polished executives surrounding him. "You look handsome," Trina whispered beside him, her manicured fingers briefly touching his shoulder. At 38, his wife had transformed herself from the small-town girl he'd married into something sleeker, more dangerous. Her emerald dress hugged curves that had cost him a fortune in gym memberships and personal trainers, though he'd never complained. Success looked good on her. Too good, as it turned out. Leon's jaw tightened as he watched her scan the room with carnivory calculation. She was hunting, even here, even now. 3 weeks ago, he'd discovered the truth about his wife's rapid climb up the corporate ladder. 3 weeks of knowing, planning, preparing for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." Regional Director Braden Holt's voice boomed through the microphone, his presence commanding the room like a general addressing troops. At 46, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, never facing real consequences for his actions. Leon watched his boss with new eyes now. The perfectly styled silver hair, the custom suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, the way he owned every space he entered. Braden had built his reputation on crushing competitors and collecting trophies. Companies, deals, women. Tonight, that collecting spree would end. "Before we begin the awards ceremony," Braden continued, his smile spreading like oil on water, "I want to share something personal with all of you. Success isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet or deals closed. It's about the people who stand beside us, who inspire us to be better." The room fell silent, sensing the shift in tone. Leon felt Trina stiffen beside him, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. "3 months ago, I met someone who changed everything for me." Braden's voice carried a tremor of emotion that Leon recognized as carefully rehearsed sincerity. "Someone who made me believe in love again after years of cynicism. Someone who showed me that professional excellence and personal happiness aren't mutually exclusive." Leon's hands clenched into fists under the white tablecloth. Around him, faces turned with curiosity and anticipation. Corporate executives loved a good romance story, especially when it involved one of their own. "Trina, would you join me up here?" The spotlight swung to their table like a hunter's eye finding prey. Trina rose gracefully, her face flushed with what observers would later describe as joy, but what Leon recognized as triumph. She walked to the stage with the confidence of someone who'd finally won the game she'd been playing in secret. "This incredible woman," Braden said, as Trina reached him, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced possession, "has not only revolutionized our HR department, but has completely revolutionized my life." Applause rippled through the crowd. Polite and expectant, Leon remained seated, his face carved from stone, watching his wife bask in stolen glory. "And now," Trina took the microphone, her voice carrying across the hushed room like a blade through silk, "I have news that makes this night even more special." The pause stretched like a wire about to snap. "I'm pregnant." The word hit the room like a physical force. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The artificial warmth of the gala atmosphere cracked and splintered. "Yes," Trina continued, her hand moving to her still flat stomach in a gesture of protective ownership. "His." 300 pairs of eyes turned to Leon as one organism, seeking his reaction to his wife's public declaration of infidelity. He could feel their stares like heat lamps, could hear the whispered calculations already beginning at nearby tables. Leon stood slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound like grinding teeth. The spotlight found him, bleaching his face white under its merciless glare. For a moment that stretched into eternity, he simply looked at his wife and her lover, memorizing their expressions of combined triumph and apprehension. Then he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile a wolf might wear before revealing its teeth to prey that had wandered too far from the safety of the herd. "Well," Leon said, his voice carrying, despite the lack of microphone, cutting through the silence like a chainsaw through silk. Congratulations are definitely in order. He began walking toward the stage with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the suddenly tomb-quiet ballroom. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, sensing something dangerous approaching. Big night for new beginnings, huh? Leon continued conversationally as he climbed the steps to the stage. Braden's confident posture faltered slightly, confusion creeping into his carefully controlled expression. Leon reached for the microphone, and Trina instinctively stepped back, her maternal protective gesture becoming one of self-preservation. You know, Braden, Leon said into the microphone, his voice now amplified to fill every corner of the ballroom. You're not the only one starting a family tonight. The confusion on Braden's face deepened, but something else was emerging. Underneath it, the first cold fingers of fear. Matter of fact, Leon's smile widened, becoming something genuinely carnivory. You might want to have a conversation with your daughter Sophie when you get home. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Leon could see understanding beginning to dawn on Braden's face, could watch the man's world start to crumble in real time. Congratulations, Braden, Leon said with mock warmth. You're going to be a granddad. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people collectively held their breath, waiting for reality to reassert itself, for someone to explain the joke they clearly weren't understanding. Then every eye in the room found Sophie Holt. She sat at table 7, a 21-year-old college student who'd been brought as her father's date to the corporate function. Her dark hair framed a face that could have been carved from marble, beautiful and completely expressionless. She met her father's horrified stare with eyes like black ice. For 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, nobody moved. Then Sophie stood with fluid grace, never breaking eye contact with her father. Without a word, without acknowledgement of the stunned crowd or the viral moment being recorded by dozens of phones, she turned and walked out of the ballroom. The spell broke. Braden's face went through a rainbow of colors: confusion, realization, horror, and finally pure rage. He lunged at Leon with a sound somewhere between a roar and a sob, his carefully maintained corporate composure shattering like glass. You sick freak! Braden screamed as he tackled Leon to the stage floor. You lying piece of garbage! The microphone squealed with feedback as the two men crashed into the podium. Leon, 15 years younger and hardened by decades of physical labor, absorbed the impact and rolled with practiced efficiency. Braden might have owned the boardroom, but Leon owned the streets. What's wrong, boss? Leon grunted as he threw Braden off him, climbing to his feet with carnivory grace. Truth hurt? Braden came at him again, swinging wild punches fueled by panic and desperation. Leon ducked easily, his movements economical and precise. He'd learned to fight in union halls and freight yards, where every confrontation was settled quickly and decisively. The crowd erupted into chaos. Women screamed. Men shouted. Security rushed toward the stage as phones recorded every second of the corporate elite's fall from grace. Leon caught Braden's next punch and twisted, using the older man's momentum against him. Braden spun and crashed into the awards table, sending crystal trophies cascading to the floor like fallen stars. Security finally reached them, 4 men in black suits moving with professional efficiency. But Leon was already stepping back, his hands raised in surrender, his point made. Leon! Trina's voice cut through the chaos, shrill with panic and rage. Have you lost your mind? The security team surrounded him as police sirens wailed in the distance. Leon allowed himself to be handcuffed, his face calm despite the hurricane of activity around him. As they led him away, he caught sight of Trina helping Braden to his feet, the two of them clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, which, Leon reflected with satisfaction, was exactly what they were. 3 weeks earlier, Leon had been a different man, a trusting man, a man who believed that 15 years of marriage meant something, that loyalty was reciprocated, that hard work and dedication would eventually pay off. That man died on a Tuesday afternoon when he'd come home early to surprise Trina with flowers and found her iPad synced to her phone, displaying messages that burned themselves into his retinas like acid. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Tell me what you want to do to me in the supply closet. When are you going to leave him? I'm tired of pretending. The flowers had hit the kitchen floor with a wet sound like something dying. Leon had stood there for 20 minutes, reading 18 months of explicit messages between his wife and his boss, watching his entire life reshape itself into something unrecognizable. Hotel receipts, dinner dates, photos that made his stomach clench with nausea and rage, conference trips that suddenly made sense, late meetings that weren't meetings at all, but it was the work emails that had really opened his eyes. Messages between Trina and other HR managers discussing his emotional instability, and concerning behavioral patterns, documented incidents that had never happened, performance reviews that had been subtly sabotaged, promotion opportunities that had mysteriously evaporated. His wife hadn't just cheated on him, she'd been systematically destroying his career to clear the path for her own advancement. Leon had spent 3 weeks planning, researching, preparing. He'd contacted an old friend from his army days who now worked private security, learning about surveillance and evidence gathering. He'd visited lawyers, accountants, and investigators, building a case that would stand up in court. Most importantly, he'd reached out to Gina Sorelli. Gina had been a rising star in the company's financial department until 6 months ago, when she'd suddenly been terminated for performance issues that nobody could quite explain. Leon had barely known her, just another face in the corporate machinery, but her sudden departure had struck him as suspicious even then. Now he understood why. They met at a coffee shop 30 miles outside the city, both paranoid about being seen together. Gina was 35, sharp-featured and bitter, with the lean look of someone who'd been fighting battles alone for too long. "You want to know about your wife?" Gina had said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. "She's a sociopath. A calculating, ambitious sociopath who'll destroy anyone who gets in her way." The folder contained copies of HR documents that should have been confidential, performance reviews that had been altered, email chains showing how Trina had manufactured complaints against Gina, built false cases for misconduct, and generally made her life a living nightmare until she'd been forced to resign. "Why?" Leon had asked. "Because I questioned her travel expenses," Gina replied with a laugh like broken glass. "I noticed she was claiming hotel rooms in cities where the company wasn't holding conferences. When I asked about it, she decided I was a threat." "You kept copies of everything." "Damn right I did. I knew someday someone would want to see them." Gina's eyes glittered with anticipation. "What's your plan?" Leon had told her. Not everything, but enough to ensure her cooperation. Gina had smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and it was a terrifying expression. "I'm in," she'd said simply. The second piece of his plan had required more delicate handling. Approaching Sophie Holt was like trying to pet a wounded tiger, dangerous and unpredictable, but potentially powerful if done correctly. He'd found her at the university library where she studied psychology, sitting alone at a table covered with textbooks and empty coffee cups. She looked exactly like her father, but with an edge of intelligence and awareness that Braden had never possessed. "You're Leon Claiborne," she'd said without looking up from her textbook. "My father's freight supervisor. I am. And you want something from me or you wouldn't be here." Sophie finally looked at him, and Leon saw years of accumulated anger and disappointment burning in her dark eyes. "Let me guess. It has something to do with dear old Dad's latest conquest." Leon had been surprised by her directness. "You know about your father and my wife." "I know my father is a serial cheater who destroys every family he touches," Sophie replied with the casual cruelty that only comes from intimate knowledge. "I know he cheated on my mother for 12 years before she finally divorced him. I know he's cheated on every woman since, and I know that Trina Claiborne is just the latest in a long line of women stupid enough to think they're special. Your mother, my mother spent 3 years in therapy trying to understand why she wasn't enough." Sophie's voice cut like a blade. "She took antidepressants, went to marriage counseling alone because he was always too busy, and blamed herself for his wandering eyes and hands. She died thinking she was the failure." Leon had felt something cold settle in his chest. "I didn't know she'd passed." 2 years ago, heart attack brought on by stress and a lifetime of emotional damage." Sophie closed her textbook with a snap. "So, yes, Mr. Claiborne, I know about my father's pattern. The question is, what do you plan to do about it?" That's when Leon had told her about the granddad line. Sophie had listened without expression, her psychology student's mind analyzing the psychological warfare implicit in his plan. When he finished, she'd sat silent for a full minute. "It won't work," she'd finally said. Leon's heart sank. "Why not?" "Because it's not cruel enough." Sophie's smile was her father's, but inverted into something genuinely frightening. "But I can make it work. I can make it destroy him." They'd spent 2 hours refining the plan, turning it from simple humiliation into precision psychological demolition. Sophie understood her father's weaknesses better than anyone: his need for control, his terror of public embarrassment, his absolute conviction that he was untouchable. "He thinks he's above consequences," Sophie had explained. "He's never faced real accountability in his life. People like him, they don't break gradually. They shatter all at once when their worldview collides with reality. And you're willing to help make that happen? Sophie's laugh was like winter wind through dead trees. Mr. Claiborne? I've been waiting my whole life for someone with the balls to take him down. Consider this my gift to my mother's memory. Now, sitting in a holding cell at the county lockup, Leon reflected on how perfectly the plan had worked. The video was already viral. He glimpsed the headlines on the arresting officer's phone. Corporate exec brawls on stage after infidelity exposed, and granddad surprise goes viral at business gala. His phone call went to his brother, who arrived. With a bail bondsman and a lawyer Leon had already retained. By midnight, he was free, walking out into the cool night air with the satisfied expression of a man who just lit the fuse on a very large bomb. The explosion was just beginning. Leon's house felt different when he returned home at 2 a.m. It looked the same. Trina's perfectly arranged throw pillows, her collection of inspirational books about corporate success, the family photos that now seemed like evidence of a massive lie. But the atmosphere had changed completely. It felt like a museum display of someone else's life. He walked through the room slowly, seeing everything with new eyes. The expensive furniture Trina had insisted they needed to project success. The designer kitchen that she'd used maybe a dozen times in 2 years. The home office where she'd planned her betrayal on company time. Dylan's room was the only space that still felt real. His 10-year-old son slept peacefully, surrounded by comic books and action figures. Leon stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the steady rise and fall of his boy's breathing. Whatever happened next, Dylan would be protected. That was non-negotiable. Leon's phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, co-workers, family members who'd seen the viral video. He ignored them all. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and damage control, and the beginning of a war that would consume months of his life. Tonight, he allowed himself a few hours of peace. Trina didn't come home. She called the next morning, while Leon was making breakfast for Dylan, her voice shrill with panic and fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed through the phone speaker. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Good morning to you, too," Leon replied calmly, flipping pancakes with practiced efficiency. Dylan looked up from his cereal, confusion creasing his young face. "The whole city is talking about it. It's on social media, it's on the news, it's everywhere." Trina's voice cracked with strain. "You've destroyed everything. I've destroyed everything." Leon's voice remained level, but Dylan could hear something dangerous underneath the calm. "That's an interesting perspective. Sophie Holt called me last night. Do you know what she said? She said she never touched you, never even spoke to you before yesterday. She said the whole thing was a lie." Leon smiled, meeting his son's worried eyes. "Smart girl, that Sophie. This is insane. You publicly humiliated me. You attacked Braden. You made everyone think." Trina's voice broke into something between a sob and a snarl. "Think what, exactly?" Leon interrupted. "That you're a cheating liar who's been destroying my career to advance your own? Because that's all true." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 20 seconds. "I want you out of my house," Trina finally said, her voice cold and controlled again. "Your house?" Leon laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Sweetheart, this house is in both our names. But don't worry, I'll be filing for divorce this morning. My lawyer says I have an excellent case for retaining primary custody and keeping the house." "Your lawyer?" The panic was back in Trina's voice. "Leon, wait. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" Leon ended the call and blocked her number. Dylan stared at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" Leon sat down next to his son, choosing his words carefully. "Your mother made some choices that hurt our family. We're going to have to live differently for a while." "Is that why you got in a fight last night?" "How do you know about that?" Dylan pulled out his phone. When had 10-year-olds started carrying phones? And showed Leon a video that already had over 2 million views. The footage was crystal clear, capturing every moment from Leon's smile to Braden's final collapse into the awards table. "It's everywhere," Dylan said quietly. "Kids at school are asking if you really, with that girl." Leon felt his jaw clench. "No, son. I would never do something like that. I was just making a point about lying and consequences." Dylan nodded solemnly, then surprised Leon by grinning. "It was pretty cool, though, like something from one of my comics." Before Leon could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Mr. Claiborne, this is Janet Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about last night's incident at the Midwest Logistics Gala. No comment, Leon said, already reaching to hang up. Wait, we've received some interesting information about your wife's role in several questionable terminations at Midwest Logistics. We think you might want to comment on that. Leon paused. What kind of information? We have emails, Mr. Claiborne. Internal company communications suggesting systematic mistreatment of employees who question certain practices. We'd like to give you a chance to tell your side of the story. Leon glanced at Dylan, who was pretending to read his comic book while obviously listening to every word. I'll call you back, Leon said, and hung up. His phone immediately rang again. Different number, different reporter, same story. Someone was leaking information to the media, turning last night's scandal into something much larger and more damaging. Leon had a pretty good idea who that someone was. Gina answered on the first ring. Did you see the morning news? I've been too busy fielding calls from reporters. Turn on channel 12, now. Leon found the remote and switched to the local news. A perky blonde anchor was reading from a teleprompter with barely contained excitement. Developing story about possible corruption at one of the region's largest logistics companies. Sources inside Midwest Logistics say last night's public confrontation between Regional Director Braden Holt and Freight Supervisor Leon Claiborne may have exposed a pattern of systematic mistreatment and wrongful termination targeting employees who questioned company practices. The screen showed a photo of Trina from the company website, smiling and professional in her HR director headshot. Trina Claiborne, the HR director at the center of the infidelity scandal, is now facing questions about her handling of several high-profile terminations over the past 2 years. Former employee Gina Sorelli, who was terminated in January after questioning travel expense irregularities, spoke exclusively with Channel 12 this morning. The video cut to Gina sitting in what looked like a lawyer's office, her expression serious and professional. What I experienced at Midwest Logistics was systematic retaliation for asking legitimate questions, Gina said to the camera. When I questioned certain expense reports that didn't seem to match company travel records, I was suddenly subjected to performance reviews that contradicted years of positive evaluations. Within 3 months, I was terminated for issues that had never been raised before. The anchor's voice returned. Sorelli provided Channel 12 with copies of internal emails and performance documents that appear to support her claims. We reached out to Midwest Logistics for comment, but the company has not yet responded. Leon muted the television and looked at Dylan, who was staring at the screen with fascination. Dad? Are you famous now? I'm something, Leon replied grimly, but I don't think famous is the right word. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed his lawyer's office. Leon, it's Patricia. We need to talk. Now. About what? About the fact that your wife filed a restraining order against you this morning, claiming you're a danger to her and your son. About the fact that she's petitioning for emergency custody. And about the fact that Braden Holt is claiming you behaved inappropriately toward his daughter. Leon felt the world tilt slightly. They're doing what? Emergency hearing is set for Monday morning. We need to be ready to fight this, and we need evidence that contradicts their narrative. Patricia's voice was sharp and focused. How quickly can you get to my office? Give me an hour. Leon looked at Dylan, who was now openly eavesdropping with the intensity of a 10-year-old who understood that his world was changing. Kiddo, we need to go see a lawyer. You're going to come with me, and you're going to tell the truth about everything you've seen at home. Can you do that? Dylan nodded with the seriousness of a much older child. Are we in trouble? No, Leon said, pulling his son into a hug. But some people are trying to cause trouble for us. We're going to stop them. Like in my comics? Leon smiled, remembering the drawings Dylan was always making. Adventures where a hero who looked suspiciously like Leon fought shadowy villains and protected a family that looked suspiciously like their own. Yeah, Leon said. Exactly like your comics. As they drove to the lawyer's office, Leon caught sight of a black sedan in his rearview mirror. It had been behind them since they left the house, maintaining a careful distance but matching every turn. Leon took a few random turns to test his suspicion, and the sedan followed each one. Someone was watching them. Leon smiled grimly and reached for his phone. If Braden wanted to play dirty, Leon was more than happy to oblige. But the older man had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a freight supervisor learns about surviving in hostile territory. The war was just beginning, and Leon intended to win. Patricia Manning's law office occupied the 15th floor of downtown's most prestigious building, but her demeanor was pure street fighter, wrapped in a designer suit. At 52, she'd built her reputation demolishing corporate executives who thought their money made them untouchable. "They're coming at you hard and fast," Patricia said without preamble, as Leon and Dylan settled into leather chairs across from her mahogany desk. "Restraining order, emergency custody petition, and Holt is threatening to file criminal charges for making terroristic threats." Terroristic threats? Leon's voice remained calm, but his hands clenched into fists. "For calling him a granddad? According to his statement, you implied a sexual relationship with his daughter, causing him emotional distress and reputational damage." Patricia slid a folder across the desk. "He's also claiming you've been stalking his family for months." Leon opened the folder and scanned the legal documents. Braden's statement painted him as an unstable employee who'd become obsessed with his supervisor's family, culminating in a public attack designed to destroy an innocent man's relationship with his daughter. "This is fiction," Leon said. "Of course it is, but it's well-crafted fiction." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Dylan with shrewd eyes. "The question is, can we prove it's fiction before Monday's hearing? What kind of proof do you need? Character witnesses, documentation of your mental state and stability, evidence that contradicts their narrative." Patricia pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Let's start with your son. Dylan, your parents are getting divorced. How do you feel about that?" Dylan looked between Leon and Patricia with the careful consideration of a child who'd learned to read adult moods. "Sad," he said finally, but not surprised. "Mom's been different lately." "Different how?" "Angrier. She used to help me with homework, but then she started working late all the time, and she'd get mad when Dad asked where she'd been." Patricia made notes. "Did your parents fight a lot?" "Not fight like yelling, but Mom would say mean things about Dad when she thought I wasn't listening, like that he was holding her back, and she deserved better." Leon felt his jaw clench. He'd tried to shield Dylan from the worst of Trina's casual cruelty, but children saw everything. "Did your father ever seem angry or violent to you?" Patricia continued. Dylan shook his head emphatically. "Dad doesn't get angry. He gets quiet. When he's really mad, he goes to the garage and works on his motorcycle." "He has a motorcycle?" "Yeah. It's like 30 years old, and he's been fixing it up since I was little. He says working with his hands helps him think." Patricia made more notes. "Dylan, I need to ask you a difficult question. Did your father ever talk to you about hurting anyone? Or about Sophie Holt specifically?" "Sophie who?" "The girl from last night, the one people think your father was talking about." Dylan's expression cleared. "Oh, her. No, Dad never mentioned her before yesterday. I didn't even know who she was until I saw the video." Patricia nodded with satisfaction. "Good. We'll need you to tell a judge exactly what you just told me. Can you do that?" Dylan looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "Will it help, Dad?" "It might help a lot." After they finished with Dylan's statement, Patricia sent him to the conference room with a paralegal and a stack of comic books while she and Leon discussed strategy. "The restraining order is a problem," Patricia said bluntly. "If it's granted, you won't be able to go home, see your son unsupervised, or go within 100 yards of your wife. That makes fighting the custody petition nearly impossible. What do we need to do? We need to prove she's lying, and we need to do it fast." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm calling in some favors. There's a private investigator I work with who specializes in corporate espionage cases. If your wife has been conducting an affair with her supervisor using company resources, there will be a trail. I already have evidence of the affair. You have texts and photos. We need financial records, travel logs, hotel registrations, credit card statements. We need to show a pattern of fraud and misconduct that proves she's not the sufferer she's claiming to be." Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "That's odd. I have 3 different reporters calling asking about you. The story is getting bigger than just a local scandal." Leon's phone rang simultaneously. He recognized Sophie Holt's number from the previous day. "I should take this," he told Patricia, stepping toward the window. "Leon?" Sophie's voice was strained, lacking the cold confidence she displayed at the university library. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "My father hired security to follow me. 2 men in a black sedan. They've been outside my apartment since 6 this morning." Leon went cold. "Are you safe?" "For now. But there's something else. My father's lawyer called this morning. They want me to sign a statement saying you approached me months ago, that you've been obsessing over me and making inappropriate contact. And they're offering me $50,000 to sign it. Leon closed his eyes. Braden was playing to win, using every dirty trick in the corporate playbook. What did you tell them? I told them to go to hell. But Leon, they're not going to stop. My father doesn't just want to discredit you, he wants to destroy you completely. Sophie, listen to me. Are you somewhere safe? Somewhere they can't get to you? I'm at my friend's apartment across town, but I can't hide forever. Leon looked out the window at the city spread below him, calculating distances and options. How do you feel about giving an interview? What kind of interview? The kind that tells the truth about your father. The kind that ends this before it gets worse. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. I'm in, Sophie said finally. But we do this my way. I want to choose the reporter, and I want guarantees about how the story gets told. Done. Leon ended the call and turned back to Patricia, who was watching him with obvious concern. We need to accelerate our timeline, he said. They're threatening Sophie Holt. Threatening how? Leon explained about the security detail and the bribe attempt. Patricia's expression grew darker with each detail. That's witness intimidation, and if we can prove it, it's a felony. She stood and walked to her window, staring down at the street below. There's something else we need to discuss. The investigator I called? He ran a preliminary check on your wife's recent activities. And? She withdrew $15,000 in cash from your joint account yesterday morning, before the gala. She also made arrangements to transfer her 401k into a personal account that doesn't include your name. Leon felt his stomach drop. She was planning to leave anyway. More than that, she was planning to take everything she could and disappear. The pregnancy announcement, the public humiliation, that wasn't the plan. That was improvisation when you forced her hand. So, what was the plan? Patricia turned back to him, her expression grim. I think she was going to frame you for something that would justify her leaving with your son and half your assets. Something that would make her look like the sufferer instead of the perpetrator. Leon's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop before you get hurt. Some games have permanent consequences. He showed the message to Patricia, who immediately took screenshots. That's a threat, she said. And it's evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that someone is very scared of what you might reveal. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Leon, I think we just found our smoking colt. Before Leon could respond, the fire alarm began shrieking throughout the building. Patricia frowned, checking her phone for emergency notifications. That's not a drill, she said. We need to evacuate. They collected Dylan from the conference room and joined the stream of people heading for the stairwells. As they descended 15 flights of stairs, Leon couldn't shake the feeling that the timing was more than coincidental. His suspicions were confirmed when they reached the lobby, and he spotted two familiar figures through the glass doors. The same men who'd been following Sophie, now positioned near the building's exit. Patricia, Leon said quietly, we need another way out. She followed his gaze and immediately understood. Parking garage. There's an exit that connects to the adjacent building. They changed direction, moving against the flow of evacuating office workers. Leon kept Dylan close, his protective instincts screaming as they navigated the crowded garage. Dad? Dylan whispered. Are we in danger? Leon thought about lying, about protecting his son's innocence for a few more hours or days. But Dylan had already seen too much, understood too much. Maybe, Leon said honestly, but we're going to be smart about it. They reached Patricia's car, a sensible sedan that looked nothing like a lawyer's vehicle. As they pulled out of the garage through the secondary exit, Leon caught a glimpse of the two men still waiting by the main building entrance. Where to? Patricia asked. Leon thought for a moment. Somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. I know just the place. 20 minutes later, they sat in a busy downtown restaurant surrounded by the lunch crowd. Patricia ordered coffee and sandwiches while Leon called Sophie back. Change of plans, he said when she answered. We're doing the interview today, right now. What happened? Your father just escalated things. Time to return the favor. The Channel 7 news studio buzzed with the controlled chaos of a major story breaking in real time. Sophie Holt sat in makeup, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. Leon watched from the green room as technicians adjusted lighting and cameras, preparing for an interview that would either vindicate him or destroy him completely. "You sure about this?" Leon asked, as Sophie joined him in the small waiting area. "I've been sure about this since I was 16 and found my mother crying in the bathroom after another one of his business dinners," Sophie replied. Her voice carried the weight of years of accumulated anger. "The only thing I regret is waiting this long." Janet Walsh, the reporter who'd called Leon that morning, approached with the purposeful stride of someone who smelled a career-defining story. "Miss Holt, we're ready for you. Mr. Claiborne, you'll be interviewed separately afterward. We want independent accounts." Sophie nodded and followed Janet toward the studio. Leon watched her go, admiring her composure. At 21, she possessed the kind of cold determination that most people never developed. His phone buzzed with another unknown number. Leon almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Leon Claiborne?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "Yes, this is Detective Ray Kowalski, Metro Police. I need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed regarding threatening behavior toward a corporate executive and his family." Leon closed his eyes. Braden was using every weapon in his arsenal. "Detective, I'm currently at Channel 7 News. You're welcome to meet me here." "That's convenient, since I was just watching the preliminary footage of an interview with Sophie Holt. Very interesting claims she's making about her father." Leon felt his heart rate spike. "You've seen the interview?" "Part of it. She's quite articulate about systematic psychological manipulation, financial manipulation, and a pattern of corporate misconduct spanning several years." Kowalski's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Mr. Claiborne, I think we need to have a very different conversation than the one I was originally planning." "What do you mean?" "I mean that what started as a complaint about your alleged threats has turned into something much more serious. When accusers start making claims about witness intimidation and bribery attempts, we tend to take notice." Leon felt a surge of hope. "Sophie told you about the men following her?" "She told us quite a lot. And she provided some very interesting evidence." Kowalski paused. "Mr. Claiborne, are you familiar with a company called Blackstone Security Services?" "No." "They're a private investigation firm that specializes in corporate espionage and what they euphemistically call reputation management. Expensive outfit, usually. Hired by people with serious money and serious problems. And according to our preliminary investigation, Braden Holt hired them yesterday afternoon to conduct surveillance on both you and his daughter." "That's when things get legally problematic for Mr. Holt." Leon felt pieces clicking into place. "Because surveilling his daughter constitutes mistreatment?" "Because surveilling witnesses in an ongoing legal proceeding constitutes obstruction of justice. And when that surveillance includes attempting to bribe said witnesses." Kowalski's voice trailed off meaningfully. "You have evidence of the bribery attempt?" "Miss." Holt recorded the phone conversation where Holt's lawyer offered her $50,000 to sign a false statement. She also photographed the men following her and ran their license plates. "Very smart, young woman." Leon slumped in his chair, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders. "So where does that leave me?" "That depends on what you tell me about your relationship with Holt and his business practices. Because, Miss, Holt's interview is just the beginning. We're now looking at a potential conspiracy involving fraud, witness tampering, and corporate misconduct." Before Leon could respond, the green room door burst open. Trina stood in the doorway, her perfect facade cracking under obvious strain. Her designer outfit was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes held the wild look of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "What have you done?" she screamed, advancing on Leon with fury that made nearby production assistants step back nervously. Leon stayed seated, his voice calm. "Detective Kowalski, are you still there?" "I'm here. And I take it that's your wife?" "Trina Claiborne, yes." "You fool!" Trina's voice cracked like a whip. "You've destroyed everything." "The company is launching an investigation. The board is asking questions. Reporters are calling every hour." "Ma'am," Leon said mildly, "I'm on the phone with police." Trina froze, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. "Police?" "Detective Kowalski, my wife just arrived at the news station. She seems distressed about some kind of investigation." "Put me on speaker, Mr. Claiborne." Leon complied. Detective Kowalski's voice filled the small room with official authority. "Mrs. Claiborne, this is Detective Kowalski with Metro Police. I'd like to speak with you about your recent financial transactions and your relationship with Braden Holt." Trina's face went white. "I don't have to talk to you without a lawyer. That's absolutely your right. However, I should inform you that we're currently executing search warrants for both your company offices and Mr. Holt's personal and professional communications. If you have anything you'd like to tell us voluntarily, now would be an excellent time. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of the ongoing interview in Studio A. Trina stood frozen, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. Trina, Leon said gently, it's over. Whatever you and Braden had planned, whatever you thought you could get away with, it's over. You don't understand, Trina whispered, sinking into a chair. He said we could start fresh. He said he'd divorce his wife, we'd move somewhere new, start our own company. He promised me everything. And what did you promise him? Trina's laugh was bitter and broken. Everything I had, everything we had. The house, the savings, your pension fund. She looked up at Leon with something that might have been regret. I was going to frame you for domestic violence, fake some bruises, file a police report, get an emergency restraining order. By the time you could fight it, we'd be gone with all the money. Detective Kowalski's voice cut through the confession. Mrs. Claiborne, I strongly advise you to stop talking and contact an attorney immediately. But Trina was beyond caring about legal advice. The dam had burst, and years of suppressed guilt and desperation poured out in a torrent of words. The pregnancy isn't even real, she continued, tears streaming down her face. It was part of the plan. Make the relationship public, get sympathy when I left you, justify taking Dylan because you'd obviously become unstable after losing your family. Leon felt his stomach turn. The pregnancy test? Fake. You can buy them online. Positive pregnancy tests for $20 each. Trina wiped her nose with the back of her hand, destroying what remained of her professional appearance. God, what have I done? What have we done? The green room door opened again, and Janet Walsh appeared with a camera operator. Mr. Claiborne, we're ready for your... Oh, she took in the scene. Leon sitting calmly while his wife sobbed into her hands, his phone broadcasting police instructions about Miranda rights and legal representation. Miss Walsh, Leon said with remarkable composure, I think you might want to keep that camera rolling. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers as Leon climbed toward the entrance for what everyone knew would be the final hearing. 6 weeks had passed since the corporate gala. 6 weeks of investigations, revelations, and the systematic destruction of two people who'd thought themselves untouchable. Patricia Manning walked beside him, a thick briefcase in one hand and the confident expression of a lawyer who'd already won her case. Dylan stayed close to his father's other side, wearing a suit that made him look older than his 10 years. Remember, Patricia said quietly as they approached the media gauntlet, no comments until after the hearing. Let the evidence speak for itself. Leon nodded, his attention focused on the courthouse doors. Behind those doors waited the final accounting for months of betrayal, manipulation, and attempted destruction. Behind those doors waited justice. The questions came at them like machine colt fire. Mr. Claiborne, how do you feel about your wife's plea agreement? Will you be seeking damages from Braden Holt? Is it true that you've been offered a promotion at Midwest Logistics? Leon kept walking, his face impassive. The promotion was real. The new CEO had personally apologized for the company's handling of the situation and offered Leon a regional management position with a significant salary increase. The board of directors had been less than pleased to discover that their regional director and HR manager had been conducting a fraud scheme that could have exposed the company to millions in liability. Braden Holt was nowhere to be seen. He'd been arrested 3 weeks earlier on charges of conspiracy, fraud, witness tampering, and embezzlement. The investigation had revealed that his relationship with Trina was just the latest in a pattern of misconduct, spanning nearly a decade. He was currently free on $1 million bond, awaiting trial from the comfort of his soon-to-be foreclosed mansion. The courtroom was packed. Leon recognized faces from the company, reporters, and family members who'd come to witness the conclusion of a story that had captivated the region for weeks. In the front row, he spotted Sophie Holt, who nodded grimly as their eyes met. Judge Margaret Chen called the court to order with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd presided over family court for 20 years. She'd seen every kind of domestic dispute, but the Claiborne case had clearly made an impression. We're here today for final custody determination in the matter of Claiborne versus Claiborne, Judge Chen announced. Given the extraordinary circumstances that have come to light during these proceedings, I'll be entering my decision into the record immediately. Trina sat at the defendant's table with her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender, who'd drawn the impossible task of defending the indefensible. Trina had lost 30 pounds since the gala, her once polished appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone whose entire life had imploded in spectacular fashion. Her plea agreement had been simple: cooperation with all ongoing investigations in exchange for reduced charges. She would serve 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation. More importantly for Leon, she'd surrendered all claims to custody, to the house, and to any assets acquired during their marriage. Mrs. Claiborne, Judge Chen addressed her directly, you've pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion, and filing false police reports. In your own words, can you tell this court why you engaged in these activities? Trina stood slowly, her voice barely audible. Your Honor, I convinced myself that I deserved more than what I had. I let ambition and greed override my responsibilities as a wife and mother. I made choices that hurt everyone around me, especially my son. She turned to look at Dylan, who stared back with the solemn expression of a child who'd learned hard truths about the adults in his life. I'm sorry, Trina whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. Judge Chen nodded curtly. Mr. Claiborne, you've requested full physical and legal custody of your minor son, along with supervised visitation rights for Mrs. Claiborne upon her release from incarceration. Is this still your position? Leon stood. Yes, Your Honor. Dylan needs stability and consistency. His mother will always be his mother, but she needs time to address her issues before she can be trusted with parenting responsibilities. Dylan, Judge Chen addressed the boy directly. You're old enough to have your voice heard in these proceedings. Where would you like to live? Dylan looked at his father, then at his mother, then back at the judge. With my dad. But I want to see my mom when she gets better. Judge Chen made notes on her paperwork. Very well. This court awards full physical and legal custody of Dylan Claiborne to his father, Leon Claiborne. Mrs. Claiborne will be permitted supervised visitation upon completion of her incarceration and mandatory counseling program. The gavel fell with the finality of justice served. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy resumed. This time, Leon paused at the top of the steps, Patricia beside him, Dylan's hand firmly in his own. I'll make a brief statement, Leon announced, silencing the crowd of reporters. 6 weeks ago, my wife publicly humiliated me at a corporate event, announcing her pregnancy by another man. Today, she's been sentenced to prison for conspiracy and fraud. Some people might call this revenge. I call it accountability. Leon's voice carried across the courthouse steps, strong and clear. For too long, people in positions of power have believed they could manipulate, cheat, and destroy others without consequences. My wife and her lover learned that's not true. Actions have consequences. Lies eventually surface. And sometimes justice comes for those who think they're above it. A reporter called out, Mr. Claiborne, do you feel vindicated? Leon considered the question for a moment. I feel like my son has learned that his father doesn't give up when things get difficult. I feel like truth is more powerful than money or position or corporate politics. And I feel like we can finally move forward with our lives. What's next for you and Dylan? Leon looked down at his son, who was watching the proceedings with fascination rather than fear. We're going home. Dylan has a comic book he's working on about a hero who fights corporate villains. I think it might be his best work yet. As they walked away from the courthouse, Dylan tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, was that really revenge? Leon thought about the question seriously. What do you think? I think it was justice, like in my comics. The bad guys got caught, the good guys won, and the family stayed together. Leon smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd worn in months. Yeah, kiddo, I think you're right. They drove home through the city that had watched their family drama unfold in real time, past billboards advertising law firms and news stations that had made careers out of their story. The house looked the same as always, but it felt different now, cleaner somehow, free of the toxic undercurrents that had poisoned it for so long. That evening, as Dylan worked on his comic book at the kitchen table, Leon's phone rang. Sophie Holt's name appeared on the screen. Leon, I wanted to thank you. For what? For giving me the chance to finally tell the truth about my father. For showing me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Leon looked at Dylan, bent over his drawing tablet with intense concentration, creating stories where heroes won and families stayed together. How are you holding up? Better than expected. I'm transferring to a different university, getting away from all this. Starting fresh. Sophie paused. He asked me to visit him in jail. Your father? Yeah. Said he wanted to apologize, wanted to make things right between us. What did you tell him? Sophie's laugh was bitter but not broken. I told him that some things can't be fixed with words. Some consequences are permanent. After they hung up, Leon sat in his kitchen, listening to Dylan hum while he drew. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. Peaceful rather than tense. Calm rather than artificially controlled. Justice, Leon reflected, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was simply about truth finally being allowed to surface, about people facing the consequences of their choices, about families finding their way back to each other through the wreckage of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from his new supervisor at Midwest Logistics. First day starts Monday. Looking forward to working with you. Leon smiled and deleted the message. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the chance to build something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Tonight, though, he was content to sit in his kitchen, listening to his son create stories where good triumphed over evil and families emerged stronger from their trials. It was, Leon thought, exactly the kind of ending Dylan would have drawn in one of his comics. The regional management office at Midwest Logistics hummed with efficient activity as Leon reviewed quarterly reports. His new position had exceeded expectations, both his own and the company's. The scandal that had initially threatened to destroy him had instead opened doors he'd never imagined walking through. A knock on his office door interrupted his concentration. Gina Sorelli entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the confident expression of someone whose vindication had been complete and profitable. The final settlement papers, she announced, setting the folder on his desk. Midwest Logistics, Blackstone Security, and Braden Holt's personal estate. 7 figures total. Leon flipped through the documents, still somewhat amazed by the magnitude of the legal victory. Hard to believe it's finally over. Oh, it's not over for everyone. Gina's smile was sharp with satisfaction. Braden gets sentenced next week. His lawyers are pushing for minimum security, but the prosecution is arguing for 5 to 7 years in federal prison. And Trina gets out in 8 months with good behavior. Last I heard, she's working in the prison library and taking accounting classes. Gina settled into a chair across from Leon's desk. You know she's been writing to Dylan? Leon nodded. Short letters, supervised by the family counselor. Dylan reads them but doesn't respond much. How's he handling everything? Better than I expected. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Leon gestured to a framed drawing on his desk, Dylan's latest comic creation, showing a hero and his young sidekick rebuilding a city after defeating shadowy corporate villains. He says he's working on a sequel. Gina laughed, the sound free of the bitterness that had defined her 6 months earlier. Her own legal settlement had allowed her to start a consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics compliance. Business was booming as companies scrambled to avoid becoming the next Midwest logistics scandal. Any regrets? She asked. Leon considered the question seriously. About exposing the truth? Never. About the methods I used? He paused, thinking about the granddad line that had started everything. Sometimes I wonder if there was a less destructive way to handle it. Leon, they were planning to frame you for domestic violence and steal everything you'd worked for your entire life. Destruction was always going to be part of this story. The only question was, who was going to get destroyed? Before Leon could respond, his assistant knocked and entered. Hey, Mr. Claiborne, your son's school called. Dylan won the regional middle school comic book competition. Leon felt his chest swell with pride. Did they say what the comic was about? Something about a hero who saves his family from corporate corruption. The title was The Granddad Surprise Chronicles. After his assistant left, Leon and Gina sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through his office window, the city sprawled below them, full of people living their lives, building their careers, fighting their own battles against systems designed to favor the powerful over the honest. You know what the best part is? Gina said finally. What's that? 6 months ago, people like Braden and Trina thought they were untouchable. They thought money and position made them immune to consequences. Now everyone in corporate America knows that's not true. She stood and headed for the door. You didn't just win your case, Leon. You changed the rules of the game. That evening, Leon arrived home to find Dylan in the kitchen, his competition trophy prominently displayed next to his homework. The boy was sketching in a new notebook, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Congratulations, comic book champion. Leon said, ruffling his son's hair. Thanks, Dad. Want to see what I'm working on next? Dylan turned the notebook around. The first page showed a detailed drawing of a family, father and son, standing together in front of a house. The title across the top read, New Beginnings, A Hero's Guide to Starting Over. It's about what happens after you defeat the bad guys, Dylan explained seriously, about building something better than what was there before. Leon looked at his son, confident, creative, unbroken despite everything he'd witnessed and endured, and felt a surge of something he could only describe as hope. That sounds like the most important story yet, Leon said. Want to help me write it? Leon pulled up a chair next to his son, picked up a pencil, and began sketching alongside the boy who taught him that sometimes the best heroes were the ones who simply refused to give up when everything seemed lost. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside, a father and son worked together to create stories where justice prevailed, families endured, and new beginnings were always possible for those brave enough to fight for them. The granddad surprise had become something none of them expected. Not revenge, not destruction, but the foundation for rebuilding a life on truth instead of lies, on courage instead of compromise. And in the end, Leon reflected as he watched his son create worlds where heroes always won, that was the best kind of surprise of all.